Okay. I would be interested. This is from DG, the initials DG, but many ask this question in this round of soliciting questions from our listeners. I would be interested in hearing more of you guys' perspective on the Scott Adams question, or more generally, the idea of white people avoiding, quote unquote, Black people. I live in DC, in the DC area, and the penalties for everything from carjacking to subway fare evasion have been reduced in the name of, quote, racial equity, not to mention changes in academic standards at many public schools, or even just the risk of being videotaped or called a Karen for all the world to see if an everyday argument about dogs or parking spots or whatever escalates. Given all of that, is it really irrational that some white people would want to live in a community where they don't have to fear such things? Most people are just trying to get through the day. What do you think about that, John?
And that's a tough question to be asked, because if I were a white person, certainly my patience with the idea of root causes and what your responsibility is in terms of, quote unquote, doing the work would be severely tested by a situation like that. And I would imagine that if you lived in a neighborhood where it was white people who were behaving that way, who were making a ruckus and breaking the law and carjacking, et cetera, you'd still want to get out of there. It's not necessarily that you don't like Black people. I'm not sure what we Black people are saying about ourselves to imply that if you don't want to live in a dangerous neighborhood, you don't want to be around Black people, as if it's inherent to Blackness to be a dangerous person and that somehow white society deserves it or something like that. So no, I can imagine what that impatience would be. I openly will say that I think you can be a very concerned, a very enlightened white person, and yet decide that you don't want physically to be around that you don't want your children around that. I get it. I mean, even here in New York City, if there's somebody who's sleeping on the train or often then waking up and demonstrating that they are not of sound mind or that they're addicted to something, neither of those things are their fault. But if that person is doing that, that person in New York City is usually Black. And it's at the point where I am becoming reluctant to bring my girls onto the train because I don't want them, not because of the danger of those guys, but because I don't want them to internalize the idea that there's something default about Blackness and being in that condition and frankly creating a nuisance on the subway. I don't think that makes me a bigot, but I just don't want my children to form a certain picture. A white person might be concerned with things like that too. So yeah, I get it. Now, Scott Adams clearly was being willfully obnoxious, but if we're talking about this issue of, do you wish to be in a neighborhood like that? Yeah, I can understand wanting to get away and feeling guilty that you're white and the people who are bothering you are Black, but you know, you have to live a life. In real life, we're all buying groceries. That's what real life is. So yeah, I get it.
Yeah, I guess I distinguish between my common sense recognition that people are going to vote with their feet, and if they feel uncomfortable, they're going to move. You know, that's just the way of the world. I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't have the government try to tell people where to live and where not to live, um, and so on. I want to distinguish between my acceptance of the fact that when the incentives are such and the environment is such that people feel uncomfortable, they're going to move. And the moral question that you put it about what are we obligated to do as decent citizens in terms of putting up with things that might be a little bit disquieting or uncomfortable in the interest of maintaining a kind of social solidarity or whatever. For example, people are committed, some, to sending their children to public schools and not to opting for private or parochial education for their kids, even though they could afford to do so because they want their kids to be a part of a educational milieu that has all walks of life represented, people from all different social classes and so on represented. They want their kids to know that not everybody was born with the advantages of middle class status that their family might enjoy, and so they in effect sacrifice a little something in terms of comfort on behalf of a commitment to kind of social solidarity. They want their kids to be exposed to stuff that kind of thing, and I think there's something to that. I think racial integration of networks of neighborhoods, of schools, other things equal, is to be sought after. Again, not by compulsion, but through a promotion of a norm or sort of ideal of good citizenship and notions of decent living. How do I live in society where there are inequalities and inequities and so on? And if I'm advantaged, maybe I shouldn't just run away and try to surround myself with other people who are advantaged. On the other hand, uh, the litany of fear of crime, a concern about being treated with disrespect, a feeling that the anti-racism mantra has marginalized white people in certain ways and has encouraged Black people to behave toward them in ways that are disquieting and uncomfortable. And a person's feeling, I don't have to put up with that. I can just move. I can move out from the city to the suburbs. I can move out from the coast to the vast middle of the country. I can move to Florida or Texas from California and find environments that are more congenial to myself. Uh, there's this guy, Bill Bishop is his name. He has a book called The Big Sort, SORT, not to be confused with Michael Lewis's book on the financial crisis called The Big Short, The Big Sort. And he's basically saying that a lot of that is going on. A lot of relocation of people around the country moving to places where they find raising their children to be a less onerous and hazardous proposition. That's not only racial, but it's going to correlate with race because some of the places they're moving away from are going to have a large number of Black people in them, and some of the stuff that they're running from is going to be, in many people's minds, associated with African American population. So I think, to conclude, Scott Adams crudely and rudely gave voice to a phenomenon that I think we all have to take seriously. It's not just Marjorie Taylor Greene up there shouting about we need a national divorce between the red and the blue. It's a lot of people, decent people, honorable people, confronted with a dilemma and having to make their way in the world. And, each of us has to figure out how it is that we're going to make our way in the world. And, some of that involves choosing environments which are congenial. And people are going to do that. And I think that imposes a constraint on activists and advocates from Black Lives Matter on down to recognize that, there are benefits and there are costs. And if you take a posture that is so antagonistic that it gives people good reason to go for the exits, you have to reckon with, what the day after they've gone for the exits look like. If you're running a big city like Chicago, I mean, it's one thing to say crime is overblown. Tucker Carlson makes a big deal out of it every night, and he's beating a dead horse. And crime is not the bugaboo that the right wingers make it out to be. That could well be true. It's another thing to say, I don't give a damn what white people tell me because they're all racist anyway. And the murder in our city is not happening in their neighborhoods. It's happening in Black neighborhoods. And please don't tell me, white person, about how it is that I have a responsibility to deal with crime in my city. You can say that if you want to. That's a invitation to the tax-paying, middle-class, family-based center of your city to head for the exits. And then you're going to have to deal with the consequences of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a book about 20 years ago by Cheryl Cashin. And she's a Black law professor. Last time
is the book called
no,
Color?
her other one. I think she has. There was one.
I
think it had integration in the title.
Okay.
If I broke the fourth wall more, I would look because I have it on a shelf somewhere in here. But she wrote a book, and it was a very interesting book. It was a very disturbing book, but very interesting. I think she's at Georgetown, or she used to be. And her thesis was that middle-class Black people should not try to move to posh, middle-class Black communities, because as soon as a community like that is founded, poorer Black people come along with them right next door anyway. And so you can't escape your poor Black brethren.
Let
and
me
that
mention that the
middle
book,
class black people have a response.
excuse me, John. I just want to mention the book is called The Failures of Integration.
That's it. That's it. Right. And
Yeah.
I recommend it, although I disagreed with almost every page. She was saying that middle class black people should stay in poor black communities and help out to, avoid the process that William Julius Wilson demonstrated, which was that
Yeah.
middle class black people move out of communities after segregation and it leaves poor black people without role models. I've always been very skeptical of that argument, but it seems to have settled in as common wisdom. And the thing about Cheryl Cashin's book is that she actually said at one point, it's one of the most bizarre points I've ever seen made in a book. I'm surprised her editors didn't catch it, but I think she meant it. And it's kind of like what people mean when they say you should stay. And it could even be applied to white people too. She says there are worse things than being shot. She actually, with a straight face, she writes, you should stay. And I'm thinking, are there?
Yeah.
I
Right.
guess I don't think she's quite aware of the power of a gun. Maybe she thinks you just get a hurt leg or something, but she actually says there are worse things than being shot. The idea is that you should stay behind and suffer, that's what the dutiful citizen does. And her point is don't try to get away because the poor people are going to come after you anyway. Weird, weird argument. But I think that's where a lot of people feel that they're supposed to at least pay a kind of lip service to, that you're supposed to have a miserable life or deal with things like being shot as just, collateral damage because society isn't fair and you don't want to be part of the system. But that's a tough one to get across to people as they're buying their groceries and raising their kids. I think it's a little utopian to think that people are going to stay behind and deal with getting shot. It's tough.
You're reminding me, we're speaking of books, of the great book by Anthony Lucas called Common Ground, about the school desegregation battle in Boston. When is the book? The book is maybe 1990, something like that. But in any case, it's a history of the school desegregation, and part of it is centered around the story of a family, Colin and Joan Diver. I still remember their name, Colin and Joan Diver. They were Harvard-trained lawyers, and they were liberals. And Martin Luther King had been assassinated the year's 1968. This is an Anthony Lucas retrospective telling. And they decide to move from Newton or Lexington or one of the Tony suburbs of Boston where they were living in their upper middle class comfort and buy a brownstone in the Back Bay of Boston, the South End of Boston, and move into, the neighborhood and try to be a part of the solution to the problem of social inequality and turmoil that was afflicting both the city of Boston and the country as a whole at that time. And he chronicles in excruciating detail how the cold reality of what it means to live with people breaking into your garage, with hookers turning tricks in the backseat of cars parked around the corner from where your kids have to walk to get to school, with drunks staggering down the avenue and insulting you as you go about your daily chores on a Saturday morning to buy your groceries, with loud music playing. And when you ask the people to turn them down, they say, fuck you. What it means to live there. They held out as long as they could. I don't know, 2 years, 3 years. And eventually they had to bite the bullet and follow Scott Adams' advice. But I mean, I raise this because
what was the last straw?
I don't remember exactly what sent them over the edge. It might have been a physical assault or a break-in or the third break-in. Uh, but Cheryl Cashin is touching on a moral imperative that a lot of people feel. We should be a part of the problem. Let's not run from the problem. Let's dig in, embrace it. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it may be costly to us. But Lucas's point in this poignant telling was that, are you going to make your children pay the price? It's one thing for you to say you got to ante up and kick in order to be a part of the solution, but you're going to make your children pay that price? That's asking an awful lot.
Yep.
So
it is.